Our epistle reading this morning is Romans 8, 6 through 11. To set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. For this reason, the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But if you are not in the flesh, you are in the Spirit, since the Spirit of God dwells in you. Anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. But if Christ is in you, though the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is life because of righteousness. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also through his Spirit that dwells in you. Our gospel reading is John 11, 1 through 4, and 30 through 44. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair, and her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" And then Jesus, greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, there's already a stench because he's been dead 4 days." And Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God?" And so they took the stone away. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
For some unaccountable reason, as I was thinking over this verse over the past week, I began to think back of just over my life in general. And I suppose when you're stuck at home or without much to do, you begin to think things over. And I happen to remember a song that came out in, I guess it must have been 1984, by Alphaville, called "Forever Young." It was a synth pop dance song. It's not the one Rod Stewart did. It's not the Bob Dylan song. It was just "Forever Young, I want to be forever young." And one of the lines that stuck out to me in it was, "It's hard to grow old without a cause." So you had to have something to keep you going. And the reason I thought of that song is because it came out when I was a sophomore in high school. And that was when I was at my most annoying Hamlet-like, angsty, self-centered, full of self and other loathing. I was insufferable. And the last thing I wanted to be was forever young. And it was also the year when there was another monster stalking the land, except it was a very human one who had a name, and he was generally known as the Night Stalker. People were afraid he was breaking into people's homes in the night, in their homes, and getting them. In 2013, he finally died after 20 years or 23 years on death row. Now, I remember being that world-weary young man, and that's what life looked like. I didn't want to stay that way. It felt like I was on death row. I didn't have any hopes. I didn't have any dreams. I was a depressive type. And I wondered how long it would be before I would finally be released. Well, I cheered up a little bit, but the world weariness came down again. In 1992, I had taken a missionary trip. with InterVarsity. We were supposed to go to Romania. Well, we were supposed to go to Nigeria. They had gas riots, and they sent us to Romania where they had never been before. The communist regime had just fallen there, ruled by a terrible dictator named Ceausescu. And while I was there, I became very sick. I was extremely weak. I started coughing badly. I asked the leaders, would you please take me to a doctor? I'm getting scared. They didn't take me to a doctor. They just said, well, we're going to North. I learned that one of the leaders had been taken to the Canadian embassy, of all places, because he had had a case of bronchitis. And we were struggling to the train station, and I had coughed up and began to cough up blood that morning. My muscles were beginning to spasm. I couldn't carry my suitcase. And I began to wonder, was I even going to survive this trip? I was very disappointed with my fellow Christians and with God. Now, the Romanians, how they came by it, I don't know. I didn't ask. They didn't say. Got me some antibiotics, and I did survive the trip. I got better. But many other bad things happened that year, and I pretty much decided that I'd had it. It seemed like everything that I wanted just went up in smoke. People attempting suicide, friend dying in a plane crash, you name it. Thinking my family was splitting up, no place to go for Christmas. And I said, Lord, that's it. I've had it. I don't, if you want somebody to follow you, I just give up. I don't know how to do that. And as time went by, things just got better. And I found that I did still, in fact, believe. And then, in fact, I realized that what had happened was I had God, I thought, on a leash. I didn't get the life I wanted, and I blamed God for it. I was still very much that bent out of shape, angsty Hamlet of 16, as though I were crying, Eli, Eli, as Christ on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's what's happening in this passage, one way or another. With Martha, with Mary, everybody says to Jesus as a statement of fact, which he neither challenges nor affirms, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. Well, why do they say that? Why is that the first thing they say? We know that Jesus stayed away, did not come on purpose so that he would die and would be in the tomb, so that, as he said, you might see the glory of God. But they say, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's what Mary says. Is that what she means? Jesus has just talked to Martha. We cut it out for length, where she comes out and says the same thing. He wouldn't have died if you'd been here. And he says to her, do you not know that I am the resurrection and the life? Whoever believes in me, even though they die, they shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She says, well, I believe in the general resurrection. And she gave a very theologically correct speech. But did she believe it? He just said, I'm told you he's not dead. Yes, his body has broken down, but he's not dead. He's with the God that you were commanded to love with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's where he is. He's not dead. So what's going on with you? Isn't that what you mean? If you had been here, I would have had what I wanted. I would still have him in my life. And so, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died, is really an accusation. I don't want this to happen. I don't want to deal with it. And then when Jesus sees her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He doesn't like to see the pain and the trouble we're in. But notice that he stopped. He's outside the village. He's waiting. And they come to meet him, and this is where these conversations have. And when Mary finally gets up and runs out, the people who are grieving with her assume she's going to the tomb. Why do they assume that? Because that's where her thoughts are. That's where the pieces of her broken heart are lying buried with him, and she doesn't know what to do. That's why all she can say in her distress is, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. If you'd been here, my heart wouldn't be shattered, along with maybe a little bit of her faith. Now, he did give Martha a little lecture on theology. But Mary, he knows better. And that's the amazing thing about God. He doesn't upbraid us. He knows that she's not ready for a lecture. She's just broken and in grief. And he sees that she can't get out of that grief. And when he sees them weeping, he asks, greatly disturbed, angry, "Where have you laid him?" And they say, "Come and see." One thing that's great about this gospel is it begins with an invitation from Jesus. If you remember how it lines up at the beginning, where John the Baptist points to Jesus and says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And a couple of his disciples begin to follow Jesus the next day, kind of on the down low, but he notices them and he says, "What do you want? What are you seeking?" And they don't know or won't say, and they say, "Where are you staying? Where are you at?" And he says, "Come and see." Can you see why he might cry? He was inviting them, come and see where I'm staying. Come and see where I live. And you know what that expression means. Not literally, not crudely, but spiritually. When something hits you where you live, you know what people mean. He was saying, come and see where I live. And he's weeping because he sees where we live. And she takes him there, to the tomb that they want to leave locked up and closed. And he says, "Roll the stone aside." No, it's been 4 days. It stinks. We can't do that. You know, there are things in life, and I still remember the first message I gave in front of a large group, as I give it to 1, 2, 3, after I came back from Romania. And I felt like my heart was shattered. And I talked about what it was like to have dreams that just went up in smoke. And I said, you know, sometimes you do need to take your dreams and put them in the tomb and bury them and roll the stone in place. That's where I was. What I didn't realize is that I needed my dreams not to be mine, but the Lord's. And there comes a day when he comes and he says, "Roll back the stone." No, it's been so long. All that old stuff. Again, do I really want to dredge all that up? The things that I'd forgotten, that I lost hope in, that I figured I just better giving up on and growing up and getting real? Yeah, unroll the stone on all that. But it's going to stink. It's messy. It's horrible. Did I not say that if you believe, you would see the glory of God revealed? You know, there's an old joke about the atheist epitaph on his tombstone that says, as he's buried there, all dressed up with no place to go. When I see that last image of almost comical of Lazarus hopping out of the tomb, and Jesus says, "Go unbind him and let him go," I wonder how many of us are dressed like that. We've already bound ourselves up for our day of burial because we've left so much of ourselves buried. Because we didn't get the life that we wanted on our own terms. Did I not tell you if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they do. They roll away the stone. And he says, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man obeyed. Will we? Come out. Wherever your heart and your hopes are buried, will you listen to his voice and come out? Though perhaps you did not get what you wanted on your terms, will you listen to his voice and come out? Now, remember the question that Jesus asked. Where have you laid him? Before they said, "Come and see." That question is going to be addressed where he was laid, or where someone was laid 3 more times. This is actually John's version of the resurrection in advance, so we don't get it wrong on the actual day. Because on that first Easter Sunday, a different Mary, Mary Magdalene, ran to the tomb. And she ran back to Simon Peter when she found it empty, beside herself with doubled grief, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." He was not in that place of death. She went to the place of death and he was not there. We do not know where they have laid him. And yes, in times of distress, especially in times of death, people asked, where is God? He is not here. He is not here. He has been risen. He has been raised. And then she goes back again, looking for him. And the angel said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Another theme that we see here. Why are you weeping? She said to them, they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Does God go missing? Can the Lord be misplaced or get lost? Or is it not rather we that get lost? And finally, Jesus comes out to her and says, woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for? And supposing him to be the gardener, a little nod to Eden, she says to him, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him. Why? So that I may come and take him away. I think that's what I was trying to do from the time I was 16 to maybe 30, to find him and take him away with me. Can we not now let him take us away, to call us out of the places of death and mourning into the life that he has prepared for us? I noted earlier how God, Jesus, doesn't usually upbraid people, especially those who are in grief. But when I hear that question, where is God? Or I hear people struggling because their faith is broken, I'm still mad at myself for letting that happen to me for so long. And so I can be short of patience because I remember the command, the first commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself, which is appended on there, is to let us know that if you don't love your neighbor, you don't love God, you don't know God yet. But sometimes I think we forget that first great commandment. We slip into loving our neighbor because we really want to love ourselves very much. And we love our neighbor so that we can feel like, well, I love them too. Or we want to think of ourselves as good people. But really, here's the problem, is I was devastated when I didn't get what I wanted. If I was loving God with my whole heart, how was my heart broken? If I was loving God with all my mind, why did I feel like I was losing it? If I was loving God with my whole soul, why did it feel like my soul was shriveling? Because I wasn't. I wasn't loving God with my heart. I was loving it for my heart, and for my mind, and for my soul, and my strength. And it wasn't until I had actually buried all of that that I could hear the voice begin to lead me out and say, come out of your places of death. Come into the light of Christ and live forever. That song, Forever Young, still makes me sad when I hear it because I remember all the things that went through my head. And I remember the heedless youth so many of my friends had that I didn't have. They just could enjoy the moment and were having such a blast, and I wasn't. And I felt like I was already growing old, too old to have fun. And now we can look out and wonder, has the world itself, the way of life we know, grown old and worn out like a garment so that it will be changed? And the new garment that's being handed to us feels like the old hair shirts that the monks would wear in order to punish themselves. No. There's a psalm that I like, Psalm 103, that says, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from destruction, who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfies your mouth with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. To be young again. That your youth indicates that the psalmist is talking about not him or herself, but about the soul, still talking to the soul. Bless the Lord, O my soul. It's an inward youth and an inward renewal. That's what Paul is talking about when he says walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh. But if Christ is in you, he says in 8:10, Though the body is dead because of sin, the spirit is life because of righteousness. Our spirits should be life. This is why he says in 2 Corinthians 4:16, and this is a popular verse, again, oddly enough, at funerals, so we do not lose heart even though our outer nature is wasting away. Our inner nature is being renewed day by day. I did feel very old at heart. And oddly, I feel younger now than I did so many years ago. I do not agree with that strange poet Wordsworth, who talked about the glory that fades with youth. No, when I was very young, I found in the world a wonder in its beauty that pointed to the Creator. And indeed, that faded quickly. But having come in some small way to know the one who gave me life and gives life to all, my heart grows young and fresh again. Isaiah 40:28. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. If you are in a place that feels dead this morning, listen to the Lord, to the voice that says, come out. God will send people to roll the stone aside. There still is a community that we can connect with to help us untie the bindings that come from old wounds and old disappointments. The one who spoke to Lazarus speaks to us still to give us a new life in the Spirit, so that even as our bodies grow old, even if the world itself grows old like a garment, God's people, in their praises of Him and their love for one another, will be forever young.